Welcome back to another edition of Unmade Godzilla movies, where I talk about the Godzilla movies that never got made. Kind of, depending on the film. Godzilla's 70th anniversary has been quite a blast thus far, hasn't it? With Godzilla Minus One and the fact that the film won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire was a movie. It made money, and the Godzilla Hotel in Shinjuku is in the new City Hunter on Netflix. Please watch City Hunter, I need that sequel. Anyway, let us begin. Yeah, I'm kind of bending the rules here a little. But this one was being directed and produced by a production assistant on the original Mechagodzilla duology. Shizuo Nakajima is an independent filmmaker whose outings include Wolfman vs. Bagon in 1972 and Legendary Beast Wolfman vs. Godzilla in 1983. These movies are exactly what they sound like. A guy turns into a kaiju-sized werewolf and fights a monster. That's it. Thankfully, because of his connections with Toho, Nakajima was able to finish Wolfman vs. Bagon. Godzilla, on the other hand... So the film has basically been in post-production forever. Pretty much. Even though Nakajima has all the assets he would need to complete it, Toho wouldn't allow him to release it officially, as only snippets of it would be shown at conventions like G-Fest. I'm sure I don't need to elaborate further on that. Although there is a good handful of footage of this fan project online, so it's not as buried as one may think. And I must say, for a fan project at the time, it actually looks impressive. The special effects and costumes are so well put together that if you didn't know any better, you'd think this was an official Toho Godzilla movie. Even the Bagon one looks super nice. Legendary Beast Wolfman vs. Godzilla was also going to be showcased in Kaiju Gaiden, which would have been a documentary about all sorts of unmade tokusatsu projects before that one got canned. The less said about that, the better, to be honest. So back when Toho rebooted the Godzilla franchise in 1984, which by the way, check out Lily's article on Kaiju United, they originally had a set of films already planned out when 1989's Godzilla vs. Biollante was being produced. However, Godzilla vs. Biollante underperformed at the box office, which left Toho scrambling for ideas. To get some gears turning, Toho thought about remaking their most successful film, King Kong vs. Godzilla. Honestly appropriate given how the roars at the very end have always felt like they were destined to meet again. We'll get to that. Basically, it would have been that King Kong falls in love with a woman, like he normally does, but this woman would actually turn him into a cyborg, and Godzilla's supposed to be in there somewhere, as well as time travel shenanigans. They didn't really think this one through, largely because of the absolute legal nightmare that is to get King Kong in pretty much anything. So as an alternative, Toho decided to go with Godzilla's most iconic rival, King Ghidorah. Reworking the cyborg Kong idea into Mecha King Ghidorah, and keeping the time travel element. Thus, we got Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in 1991. I already covered a little bit of this in my History of Godzilla series, but hey, I'll take any excuse to go further in depth. As mentioned before, King Kong vs. Godzilla would be the most successful entry in the series for years to come, and as one could imagine, a sequel would be a no-brainer. This was when continuation King Kong vs. Godzilla was on the table for a 1963 release. Shinichi Sekizawa's screenplay would have seen Kong get enraged over an infant which he was protecting getting taken by a search party, as he would then fight a giant scorpion. Meanwhile, Godzilla, who is said to have died after his fight with Kong, surprisingly enough, is revived by an explosion that actually restarts his heart. Eventually, the two cross paths once again, and have their epic rematch on Mount Aso, which would wound up going off, taking the two monsters into its eruption. But even though Toho had an entire script ready, they decided to go into a different direction. They were still interested in doing something with the Frankenstein concept that was present in King Kong vs. Prometheus, a film that Willis O'Brien pitched around where Kong fought a Frankenstein like a double of himself, which was turned into King Kong vs. Godzilla after John Beck presented it to Toho without his permission or knowledge. Around that time, Toho had released The Human Vapor in 1960, which producer Tomoyuki Tanaka had already greenlit a sequel. So why not do Frankenstein vs. the Human Vapor? Well, Toho would also scrap that idea before Sekizawa could finish a story. Back to Godzilla. Even though plans for a King Kong vs. Godzilla sequel were scrapped, there was still an opportunity to do another outing with their monster. Now, Toho was considering Frankenstein vs. Godzilla. A team of scientists is studying the effects of radiation when they come across a small childlike humanoid. As it turns out, this being was originally a heart that was irradiated by the bombing of Hiroshima, which allowed it to grow appendages and steadily increase in size. This becomes a major concern for the JSDF, who free Godzilla from the Bering Sea to have him killed. Yeah, Toho did not like this idea. They felt it really didn't make a whole lot of sense for the JSDF to have Godzilla just kill another monster. Keep in mind, this was before King Ghidorah turned Godzilla into the reluctant hero he would later become. So it was decided that the project would get split into two. The first was 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla, feeling it was appropriate to have Godzilla cross over with another monster, given that was the appeal of King Kong vs. Godzilla in the first place. So why not do one in-house? The other would be Frankenstein Conquers the World in 1965, where almost everything is the exact same, but Godzilla is replaced with Bagon and Frankenstein was rewritten to be more of a sympathetic underdog. And I don't care that octopus ending is still terrible and you will never gaslight me into thinking otherwise, Sean! Oh yeah, and that ending for continuation King Kong vs. Godzilla, that was later reworked into War of the Gargantuas. Brad Pitt's favorite movie, apparently.
The Gargantuas.
Yep, we're talking about Bagon again. So remember that set of Godzilla movies that I mentioned earlier? The one that was ultimately scrapped after Godzilla vs. Biollante underperformed? Well, the two movies that would have come after were Mothra vs. Bagon and Godzilla vs. Bagon. As you can tell, someone really liked Bagon. But unlike last time, we actually have an origin for Bagon in this draft. Centuries ago, China would be terrorized by the monstrous Bagon, who would go out of his way to wipe out entire forests, and so that's where Rebirth of Mothra got that idea. And Mothra would ward off the monster in battle as told in ancient legends that would be passed through generations, which also warned that Bagon will return once more. So we got a little bit of Final Wars in there too. Nice. While the drafts for Return of Godzilla had a more straightforward concept for Bagon, this draft would go hog wild on imagination. Tons of different concepts would be drawn up by Shinji Nishikawa, Hiroto Aragaki, Minoru Yoshida, and Takashi Soniyama. This was still when Bagon was conceived as a shape-shifting monster before special effects director Koichi Kawakita scrapped the idea in favor of Bagon having a singular form, likely due to how expensive it would have been. Afterwards, more concept designs would be made until they would settle on this now iconic look by Nishikawa, though personally, I'm more into this one by Yasushi Nirasawa. Yep, that Nirasawa. Eventually, Mothra was brought back to the big screen in 1992's Godzilla vs. Mothra, and surely we can talk more about that another time. But what about Godzilla vs. Bagon? Unfortunately, there's not much pertaining to the project as it was still in its early stages. At least, not till they tried again in 1994. Stay tuned for that one. Alright, first time mentioning this movie on this channel, here we go. Prophecies of Nostradamus is a 1974 sci-fi disaster film from Toho, directed by Toshio Masuda. The movie depicts spectacular and horrifying special effects sequences, based on the warnings from the famous book of the same name. However, the film seems to have been locked away somewhere at Toho, as they refuse to acknowledge the movie's existence, like whatsoever, despite using it for stock footage in later Godzilla films. This is because the film is a little controversial. One, there's a scene depicting cannibals in New Guinea that could be interpreted as racist or insensitive. Another scene involves two mutants fighting one another for food, which the Aaron Board, which is basically Japan's rating system over there, felt it was offensive towards the survivors of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, resulting in the film getting banned after 1980. Though after the film's release, Tomoyuki Tanaka was interested in a sequel, one that took a more supernatural and metaphysical approach, as opposed to the socio-political kind its predecessor did. This one would follow a man named Tsutomu Goto, named after the author of the Nostradamus books, who would try to contact the spirit of Nostradamus himself as a means to prevent the world from meeting its impending destruction. While there isn't too much information about this project in particular, it's safe to say that the infamy of Prophecies of Nostradamus had unfortunately destroyed any chance of it getting followed upon. That's gonna be it for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Same as before, don't forget to check out the poll in the description and vote on which projects y'all would like to see get covered next. Thank you so much to my channel members and my Patreon supporters for your, well, support, for lack of a better term, always appreciated. And as always, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And while my presence may fade away for now, when I return, I only wish that you have grown stronger in body, mind, and spirit. What am I even saying? I have no idea. Take it easy, everyone.